What's the most badass thing your kid ever did? My son smashed his uncle's guitar into 1,000 pieces. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard the crash from the garage, followed by my brother screaming. I ran out to find my 13-year-old Levi standing over the remains of my brother's prized Gibson acoustic, while my brother held him by the collar. "Your psycho kid just destroyed my $3,000 guitar," my brother shouted. "He took a baseball bat to it like a maniac." "Levi, what were you thinking?" I asked, staring at the wooden splinters and tangled strings scattered across the concrete floor. "That guitar meant everything to Uncle Bill." "Let go of me," Levi said, trying to pull away from his uncle's grip, and I noticed his hands were clenched. "Not until you tell your mom what you did," Bill screamed, his face bright red. "This guitar was signed by Johnny Cash himself." "I don't care who signed it," Levi said. "I heard what you've been playing on it." Bill's grip loosened slightly and his face went from angry to something else. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I heard you in here last night writing songs," Levi said, looking at me now. "He's been composing these horrible songs about protecting the white race and stopping interracial marriage," Levi said, looking directly at me. I felt my Estaniac drop as Bill immediately started denying it. "He's making things up because I wouldn't let him borrow the guitar." "I recorded you." Levi pulled out his phone with his free hand. "Mom, listen to this." The recording was fuzzy, but I could clearly hear Bill's voice singing about keeping bloodlines pure and something about race mixing being genocide. "Those are just joke songs," Bill said quickly, finally releasing Levi. I was messing around with some edgy humor. "Joke songs?" Levi asked. "You have a whole verse about how my dad shouldn't exist because he's black." "You had no right to record me," Bill shouted. "That's invasion of privacy." "You're living in our garage," I said, finding my voice finally. "We took you in after your divorce and you're writing racist songs about my husband in my home?" "They're not about Danny specifically," Bill insisted. "They're about heritage and tradition." My husband Danny came out from the house, probably drawn by all the shouting. "What's going on out here?" he asked. Bill's whole demeanor shifted when he saw Danny, his jaw clenching visibly. "Your son destroyed my guitar," Bill said, not looking Danny in the eye. "The one Dad gave me." "He's been writing white supremacist songs," Levi said, moving closer to his father. "Dad, he has lyrics about you and Mom." Danny's face immediately darkened. "About us? That's ridiculous," Bill said, but he was starting to sweat. "They're historical ballads." "Historical ballads?" Levi asked. "You literally wrote a song called Sister's Betrayal about Mom marrying a black man." "You're all overreacting," Bill said. "They're just songs, freedom of expression, and you broke my guitar over it." "That's not why I broke your guitar," Levi shouted. Everyone turned to look at him. "I found this in his guitar case." Levi pulled out a folded flyer. "He's driving to Alabama tomorrow to perform these songs at a white nationalist rally." I grabbed the flyer and my hands started shaking as I read it because it was an advertisement for a KKK gathering with my brother's name listed as the featured musical performer. "It's not the Klan," Bill insisted. "It's a heritage organization." "It literally has a burning cross on the flyer," Danny said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You went through my personal belongings?" Bill yelled at Levi. "You violated my privacy and destroyed my property. You were going to perform songs about my parents' marriage at a KKK rally with a guitar you kept in our house," Levi said, his voice shaking with rage. "They're not about your parents specifically," Bill insisted. "They're about preserving white culture." "Your song literally uses the N-word to describe Dad," Levi said. "Multiple times." "It's used in a historical context," Bill said. "The context of saying I'm a race traitor for marrying Danny?" I demanded. "Because that's what we just heard on that recording." "My God, Bill. One of your songs is literally titled Blood Betrayal, and it's about white women who marry black men. That one's just documenting cultural decline," Bill said weakly, still avoiding Danny's eyes. "How long have you been involved with these people?" I asked. "Since before you even met him," Bill said, finally looking at Danny with undisguised hatred. "I tried to warn you what would happen." "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Bill's face went dark, and he grabbed the baseball bat Levi had dropped. "You race traitors are all the same," he said, his voice completely different now, cold and full of hate. "Bill, put the bat down," Danny said, stepping in front of me and Levi. "You," Bill said, pointing the bat at Danny. "You corrupted my sister, polluted our family bloodline with your mongrel kids." "Don't you dare talk about my children that way," I said, my voice shaking. "They're abominations," Bill said, taking a step toward us with the bat. "And you're a race traitor whore who chose a—" Danny lunged for the bat before Bill could finish the slur, but Bill swung it at his head, and I screamed, watching the bat whip through the air like it was in slow motion. The bat caught Danny right above his left temple with a sickening crack that made my whole body go cold. Blood started running down his face immediately, bright red against his dark skin, and he stumbled sideways into the workbench. Levi screamed, "Dad!" but stayed frozen where he was standing, his eyes huge as he watched the blood drip onto the concrete. Bill pulled the bat back for another swing, and Danny tried to duck away, but his balance was off from the head blow. The second swing barely missed as Danny fell backward against the garage wall, one hand pressed to his bleeding head while the other reached out trying to steady himself. I grabbed Levi and yanked him behind me hard enough that he almost fell, screaming at Bill to stop, that he was going to kill him. Bill's face was twisted into something I'd never seen before, pure hate as he raised the bat again and Danny was trapped against the wall with nowhere to go. That's when I saw Bill's grip loosen for just a second as he adjusted his hands on the bat handle. I lunged forward and grabbed the bat with both hands, using my whole body weight to wrench it away from him. The wood was slippery with sweat and Bill tried to hold on, but I twisted hard and pulled it free. He stumbled backward toward the destroyed guitar pieces, almost tripping over the broken neck, and I stepped between him and my family, holding the bat up like I knew how to use it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep my grip, but I wasn't letting go of that bat for anything. Levi's hands were trembling as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice cracking as he told the operator his uncle just attacked his dad with a baseball bat. He put it on speaker and gave our address clearly even though I could hear him trying not to cry, repeating it twice to make sure they got it right. I dropped the bat for a second to grab a shop rag from the workbench and pressed it against Danny's head wound, feeling the cloth get wet with blood way too fast. The operator was asking questions, and Levi was answering them, saying yes, his dad was conscious, yes, he was bleeding a lot, no, the attacker wasn't armed anymore. Bill started pounding on the garage wall with his fist, shouting that we were overreacting, that it was just family drama about some stupid songs. He moved toward his guitar case and the boxes of his stuff piled in the corner, but I picked up the bat again and blocked his way. "That's my property," he yelled, trying to push past me, but I held the bat up higher and he backed off. I told Bill to get out right now, my voice shaking but loud, and started moving Danny and Levi toward the door that led into the kitchen. Danny could walk, but he was unsteady, leaning on me heavily, and the rag against his head was soaked through with blood. We got through the door and I slammed it shut, turning the deadbolt with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. The bat was still in my hand and I kept it close as we moved into the kitchen, Danny sinking into a chair while Levi stayed on the phone with 911. The operator asked if we had the weapon secured and I confirmed the bat was with us, safe from Bill. She wanted to know if there were other weapons in the house and I said no, just kitchen knives that were all inside with us. Levi held the phone closer to the speaker and played more of the recording he'd made of Bill's racist songs, the horrible lyrics echoing in our kitchen. The operator said officers were on the way, should be there in less than 5 minutes, and to stay inside with the doors locked. Through the kitchen window, I could see our neighbor Camilla Lyle standing in her driveway with her phone pressed to her ear, clearly calling 911 too after hearing all the screaming and commotion. Part of me felt embarrassed that the whole neighborhood was seeing this. Our family drama spilled out for everyone, but mostly I was just grateful someone else witnessed what happened. Bill must have gone back outside because suddenly he was banging on the exterior garage door, the metal rattling with each hit. Even from inside, I could hear him shouting about race traitors and mongrels and threatening to sue us for destroying his guitar and stealing his belongings. I grabbed my phone and started recording video through the window, catching his face twisted with rage as he screamed the most awful things about Danny and our kids. The slurs were even worse than what he'd said inside, like he didn't care who heard him anymore, and I made sure my phone picked up every word. Levi had moved closer to his dad and was shaking harder now, whispering something I couldn't hear at first. Then I realized he was apologizing about the guitar, saying he should have just told us about the songs instead of breaking it. Danny pulled him close with the arm that wasn't holding the bloody rag to his head. "You did the right thing," Danny said quietly, his words a little slurred. "You tried to stop something terrible from happening." The sirens got louder and Bill must have heard them too, because the banging on the garage door stopped suddenly. Through the window, I watched him sprint to his beat-up Ford parked in our driveway. He threw himself into the driver's seat and the engine roared to life. The tires squealed as he backed out fast, nearly hitting our mailbox. I grabbed my phone and started recording video as he peeled away down our street. The license plate was clear in the frame just as the first police car turned the corner with lights flashing. Bill's car disappeared around the opposite corner, and the police car pulled into our driveway. The smell of blood was getting stronger, and I looked at Danny's head wound more closely. Fresh blood kept seeping through the dish towel he was holding against it. I grabbed clean white towels from the drawer and pressed them against the gash while checking his pupils. They looked the same size, which I remembered was good from a first aid class years ago. The towels turned red way too fast and my hands started shaking harder. There was so much blood on the kitchen floor now. Someone knocked hard on the front door and a voice called out that it was the police. I set the baseball bat down on the counter where they could see it through the window. I put my hands up as I walked to the door even though they probably couldn't see me yet. Levi pressed himself against the wall near the kitchen table. I opened the door slowly and told the officers we were the ones who called, and the attacker had just fled in a Ford. 2 officers came in with hands near their weapons until they saw the bat on the counter. The older one introduced himself as Sergeant Glenn Kelly, while his younger partner went straight to Danny. Glenn called for EMS on his radio the second he saw all the blood. His partner started taking photos of Danny's injury with his phone. Glenn asked us to step apart so he could get individual statements about what happened. He had me sit in the living room while Levi stayed in the kitchen with Danny and the other officer. I could hear Glenn's partner asking Danny basic questions to check if he was alert. Glenn wrote down everything I said about Bill's songs and the guitar and the attack. He wanted to see the garage, so I led him out there where the smashed guitar pieces were scattered everywhere. His partner took more photos of the wooden splinters and tangled strings while Glenn documented each piece of evidence. Camilla from next door came over to our driveway and told Glenn she'd heard everything from her garden. She said Bill was screaming horrible racial slurs and threats that she could hear clearly over her fence. She pulled out her phone and showed Glenn her doorbell camera app, saying it might have caught some of what happened since it faces our driveway. Glenn took down her contact information and asked her to save the footage. Back inside, Glenn asked about the recording Levi made of the racist songs. Levi played it for him on speaker, and Glenn's face got darker with each verse. He asked about the KKK rally flyer too, and I handed it over with shaking hands. Glenn had me email him the recording directly from Levi's phone so he'd have a digital copy. He logged everything in his notebook and explained these would be important for assault charges. He said the racial motivation could enhance the charges to a hate crime, which was a more serious felony. The EMS team arrived and rushed to Danny with their equipment bags. They checked his vital signs and examined the head wound carefully. The lead paramedic said he needed stitches and a proper evaluation for concussion at the hospital. My chest got tight watching them work on him, but Danny reached over and squeezed my hand. He said he was okay, but his words still sounded a little fuzzy. Glenn explained they'd issued a BOLO alert for Bill's vehicle with his license plate number. He said Bill would likely face assault with a deadly weapon charges when they caught him. The hate crime enhancement could mean serious prison time if convicted. Levi suddenly spoke up and told Glenn about destroying the guitar with the baseball bat. His voice was shaking as he admitted what he'd done. He asked if he was going to jail too. Glenn looked at him for a moment, then said there might be a property damage issue technically. But given Levi's age and the circumstances with the racist songs and planned rally, it was unlikely prosecutors would pursue charges against him. The paramedics got Danny onto a stretcher and said we could follow them to the hospital. Before we left, Glenn handed me a small white card with a victim advocate's phone number on it. He said we should change all our locks immediately and avoid any contact with Bill, even through other family members. He explained this was basic safety planning for domestic violence situations. He said Bill might try to reach out through relatives to intimidate us or convince us to drop charges. Glenn gave me his direct cell number too and said to call if Bill tried to contact us at all. The paramedics wheeled Danny out to the ambulance and I grabbed my purse and car keys while Levi followed close behind me. We drove behind the ambulance with its lights flashing and I kept checking the mirror to see Levi in the back seat. The hospital parking lot was crowded and I had to circle 3 times before finding a spot near the emergency entrance. Inside the ER waiting room, the bright lights made everything look too clean and normal for what just happened. I held Danny's hand while we waited for the doctor, and neither of us said those 3 letters out loud. The receptionist handed me forms to fill out and my hands shook as I wrote down what happened. Other people in the waiting room looked normal with their normal problems, while we sat there with blood still on Danny's shirt. A nurse called Danny's name after 20 minutes, and we all stood up together. She led us to a small exam room where Danny sat on the paper-covered table. The doctor came in and examined the wound on Danny's head while asking questions about what happened. I explained about Bill attacking him with the bat, and the doctor's face got serious. He said Danny would need stitches and ordered a CT scan to check for brain injury. While we waited for the scan results, Levi sat quietly in the plastic chair next to me. He asked if I was mad about the guitar, and his voice was small. I told him I was proud of his courage but also upset about the destruction. I explained that both feelings can be true at the same time, and life is often complicated like that. He nodded and leaned against my shoulder while we watched the nurse clean Danny's wound. The nurse took photos of Danny's injuries with a hospital camera and explained this was standard for assault cases. She measured the wound and documented everything in the computer, while Danny winced at the cleaning solution. A hospital social worker knocked and came in with a stack of pamphlets about protective orders. She explained the process for getting a restraining order and gave us information about victim services. My phone started buzzing with texts from family members who heard something happened. My cousin asked if we were okay and said she was praying for us. My aunt sent a message saying we should handle this privately, instead of involving police. Another cousin suggested we were overreacting, and that brothers and sisters fight sometimes. I read each message and felt my chest get tighter with each one. I turned my phone to silent and shoved it back in my purse. The CT scan came back clear and the doctor said Danny was lucky the bat didn't hit him harder. He numbed the area and started stitching the wound while I held Danny's other hand. 12 stitches total, and the doctor explained concussion symptoms to watch for. He gave us discharge papers with instructions about wound care and when to come back. The clock on the wall showed almost midnight when we finally left the hospital. The exhaustion hit me all at once in the parking lot and I had to lean against the car. Danny moved slowly and Levi helped guide him to the passenger seat. The drive home felt longer than usual with empty streets and closed stores. Our house looked different when we pulled up, like it wasn't really ours anymore. I helped Danny inside while Levi carried the discharge papers and prescriptions. Danny went straight to bed with an ice pack while I stood in the kitchen not knowing what to do. I remembered what Glenn said about Bill's belongings and got trash bags from under the sink. In the garage, I grabbed Bill's clothes from the corner where he kept them. His shaving kit was on the shelf and I threw it in the bag too. Each item made me think about the brother I thought I knew versus who he really was. I found his work boots and an old jacket he wore when it was cold. There were books about the Civil War and some CDs he listened to while working. I dragged the bags to the end of the driveway like Glenn suggested. Looking at his stuff piled there made me want to cry and scream at the same time. Back inside, Levi was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He said he couldn't sleep and looked up at me with red eyes. He admitted he'd been hearing those songs for weeks but kept hoping I'd hear them myself. He thought maybe Bill would stop, or that he was mishearing the words. He felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, and his voice cracked when he talked. I sat down next to him and we talked about how hard it is to believe bad things. When you love someone, you want to think the best of them even when evidence says otherwise. We make excuses or ignore warning signs because facing the truth hurts too much. Levi asked if I knew Bill was like this when we were kids. I told him I never saw it, but maybe I wasn't looking hard enough. The kitchen clock showed 2 in the morning, and we were both exhausted but wide awake. I thought about calling Bill's ex-wife to warn her about what happened. My fingers hovered over her number in my phone, but I decided to wait until morning. The urge to do something fought against the need to be careful and think things through. I made hot chocolate for Levi, and we sat there not talking, just being together. When the sun came up, I was still in the same chair with my cold mug. My phone rang, and it was Glenn calling with an update about Bill. He said Bill was detained at a traffic stop around 4 in the morning heading toward Alabama. The police were questioning him, and he mentioned they were pursuing an emergency protective order. This would legally prevent Bill from contacting us or coming near our house. Glenn said the prosecutor was taking this seriously because of the hate crime aspect. I thanked him and hung up, feeling relieved but also sad about everything. The house phone rang an hour later, and it was someone from Levi's school. They said they were notified about Levi witnessing domestic violence and wanted to schedule him with the counselor. The counselor's name was Joyce Pappas, and she had an opening that afternoon. I was grateful they were being proactive, but worried about Levi being treated differently at the school. That afternoon, the insurance company called while I was cleaning up glass shards from the garage floor. The agent asked about the damage amount and whether we'd filed a police report yet. I explained about the guitar and the fight, trying to keep my voice steady while giving details. She said they'd need copies of the police report and any repair estimates for the garage damage. I took photos of the dents in the wall where Bill had pounded and the scattered guitar pieces. The agent mentioned we might need to file a claim against Bill's insurance if he had any. I wrote down every word she said in a notebook I'd started keeping for all this stuff. Later, Joyce Pappas called to confirm Levi's appointment for the next day after school. She sounded warm and understanding, saying she'd already spoken with Glenn about the situation. I drove Levi to her office the next afternoon, and he looked nervous walking through the school hallways. Joyce had a small office with beanbag chairs and posters about feelings on the walls. She talked with Levi for almost an hour while I waited outside reading old magazines. When they came out, Levi's eyes were red, but he seemed calmer somehow. Joyce asked to speak with me privately while Levi went to get water from the fountain. She explained that destroying property was wrong even when we're angry about something serious. But she also said Levi's feelings about the racism were completely normal and valid. She taught him some breathing exercises for when he felt scared about Bill coming back. Joyce suggested we make a plan where Levi would pay back some money for the guitar. Not because Bill deserved it, but because it would help Levi deal with his guilt. She thought having him do extra chores and save his allowance would teach responsibility. We'd put the money aside even if we never actually gave it to Bill. Levi could write down his earnings on a chart to see his progress over time. That evening, Camilla knocked on our door holding a casserole dish and a small USB drive. She'd made us dinner since she figured we weren't thinking much about cooking lately. The footage from her doorbell camera showed Bill running to his car after the fight. You could see him throwing stuff in the back seat and speeding away down our street. She said she'd already given a copy to Glenn, but wanted us to have one too. Camilla stayed for a few minutes, patting my shoulder and saying the whole neighborhood was behind us. I felt embarrassed that everyone knew our business, but grateful for the support anyway. Glenn called the next morning to say the prosecutor was moving forward with assault charges. They were also filing for an emergency protective order that would keep Bill away from us. He recommended we come to the hearing to show the judge we were taking this seriously. My hands shook as I wrote down the courthouse address and the hearing time. I started calling relatives to let them know about the protective order proceedings. My aunt immediately said I was overreacting and ruining Bill's life over some silly songs. My cousin texted that I was choosing politics over family, and should be ashamed. Their messages hurt, but I kept repeating that Bill attacked Danny with a baseball bat. Some relatives said we should handle it privately without involving courts and police. Others accused me of being dramatic and looking for attention with all this legal stuff. I stopped answering after the 5th nasty message and turned off my phone for a while. Levi spent the evening working on an apology letter about breaking the guitar. His handwriting was messy and he crossed out words, starting over 3 times. He wrote that he was sorry for destroying property, but explained why he felt so angry. The letter sounded exactly like a 13-year-old wrote it, which was perfect. We decided his lawyer could give it to Bill's lawyer if that ever became necessary. That night, Danny finally admitted he'd heard Bill humming weird stuff weeks earlier. He said Bill was singing something about pure bloodlines while fixing a shelf. Danny thought it was just Bill being an idiot and making bad jokes. We sat at the kitchen table talking about all the warning signs we'd missed. Neither of us wanted to believe someone in our family could think that way. We kept making excuses or explaining things away, because facing the truth seemed impossible. I spent hours online reading about how people get pulled into hate groups. The websites explained how it starts small with jokes and comments that seem harmless. Then they find communities where everyone agrees with their views and it gets worse. Bill's rally performance would have been his big moment with people cheering for his hate. This wasn't just him having some bad thoughts, but being part of something bigger. The morning of the protective order hearing arrived and I barely slept the night before. I organized all our evidence in a folder with labeled tabs for everything. The recordings were on a CD, the flyer was in a plastic sleeve, and witness statements were typed up. I made copies of the medical records showing Danny's stitches and concussion diagnosis. Having everything documented and organized made me feel slightly more in control of this mess. We drove to the courthouse in silence, and I kept checking the rearview mirror for Bill's car, even though I knew he was already in custody. The courthouse parking lot was packed, and I recognized several family members' cars, which made my stomach tight. Danny walked between me and Levi like he was shielding us, and we went through the metal detectors where the guard looked at our folder of evidence. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches that creaked when we sat down. My cousin Sandra was already there glaring at us from across the aisle, and I saw 2 of Bill's friends from his band sitting behind her. The side door opened, and Bill shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller than I remembered, and his face was pale with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept. His lawyer whispered something to him and he nodded without looking at us. The judge came in and we all stood up, then sat back down when she told us to. She read through the police report and looked at the photos of Danny's stitches on her computer screen. Bill's lawyer argued this was a family dispute that got out of hand, but the prosecutor played Levi's recording of the racist songs. The judge's face got harder as she listened to Bill singing about keeping bloodlines pure. She asked Bill if he had anything to say, and he just shook his head. The judge granted the temporary protective order for 6 months and said Bill couldn't come within 500 feet of us or our home. She also ordered him to surrender any weapons he owned and prohibited him from buying new ones while the criminal case was pending. The whole thing took less than 20 minutes, and then Bill was led back out through the side door. Outside the courthouse, Sandra cornered us by our car and told me Bill was planning to sue us for the guitar's value. She said we'd destroyed a family heirloom worth $3,000 and Bill had every right to get that money back. Levi heard everything and his face went white as we drove away. That afternoon, Joyce met with Levi at the school to help him practice what to say when kids asked about the police cars. She taught him to say it was a family matter that was handled and he didn't need to share details. They practiced different responses for different questions, and Joyce reminded him he could always say he wasn't comfortable talking about it. She gave him a pass to come to her office anytime he felt overwhelmed during the school day. That evening, I started organizing everything into a 3-ring binder with dividers for different sections. Police reports went in one section, medical records in another, and court documents in a third. I made a spreadsheet of all our expenses, including Danny's hospital bills and the lawyer fees that were already adding up. I calculated how much therapy might cost for all 3 of us and whether our insurance would cover it. Writing everything down and putting it in order helped me feel like I had some control over the chaos. Glenn called the next day to explain what would probably happen with Bill's criminal case. He said the prosecutor might offer Bill a plea deal for assault instead of attempted murder with a deadly weapon. The deal would probably include anger management classes and something called bias education programs. Glenn warned us that these programs rarely changed people's actual beliefs, but they'd teach Bill to follow the law. He said Bill would probably get probation instead of real jail time unless he violated the protective order. I decided to call Bill's ex-wife to let her know about the protective order in case Bill tried to contact her. She answered on the 3rd ring, and when I explained what happened, she wasn't surprised at all. She told me Bill had written similar songs during their marriage about immigrants taking jobs from white people. She said she'd found notebooks full of racist writings in his desk drawer years ago. Her validation made me feel less guilty about not seeing the warning signs, because she'd lived with him for 5 years and only gradually realized how deep his hate went. 3 days later, an envelope with no return address showed up in our mailbox. The typed letter inside blamed Danny for breaking up our family and destroying Bill's life. It said I was a traitor to my race and my children were abominations who would never belong anywhere. We immediately took it to the police station where Glenn added it to the evidence file. That night, I went through the house checking every lock twice and looking out windows at every little noise. Camilla came over the next morning with her husband who worked in home security. They helped us install cameras at the front door, back door, and garage that sent alerts to our phones. Camilla organized our neighbors into a watch system where everyone had each other's numbers and agreed to report any suspicious activity. Several neighbors told us they supported us and would keep an eye out for Bill's car or his friends. Meanwhile, Levi had started his repayment plan for the guitar using a spreadsheet Danny helped him create. He listed his regular allowance plus money from extra chores like cleaning gutters and washing cars. Danny and I agreed to match whatever Levi saved each month to help him learn about responsibility without crushing him financially. Levi tracked every penny in his spreadsheet and calculated it would take him 18 months to pay back half the guitar's value. The prosecutor called me 2 days later to tell me that Bill had missed his big rally in Alabama since he was sitting in a jail cell that weekend. She said some of the rally organizers had been sending angry messages to the courthouse about Bill's arrest ruining their event. Glenn stopped by that afternoon to check on us and said they were monitoring those messages, but most were just people venting online. He showed me printouts of some posts calling us race traitors and worse, but said none rose to the level of actual threats they could prosecute. Danny went to his first therapy appointment the following week and came home looking exhausted. The therapist had diagnosed him with mild PTSD symptoms from being attacked in his own home because of his race. She told him it was normal to feel unsafe in spaces that should be secure and gave him exercises to work through the trauma. He started doing these breathing exercises whenever he heard loud noises in the garage. Joyce called to set up a joint session for Levi and me to work on better communication strategies. We sat in her office practicing how to talk about difficult topics while she guided us through different scenarios. Levi gained confidence in expressing his feelings without breaking things, and I learned to really listen when he was trying to tell me something important. She had us practice phrases like, "I'm worried about," and "I need help with," instead of just acting on emotions. 3 weeks into the legal process, Bill's attorney sent a formal demand letter about the guitar's value. The letter arrived by certified mail demanding $3,000 in damages plus legal fees. I scanned it and forwarded everything to our insurance company, who said they'd handle the property damage claim. The insurance adjuster called back saying they'd cover it under our liability policy after reviewing the police report showing Bill's assault. Glenn advised us during his next check-in to keep all communication going through lawyers because of the protective order. He explained that any direct contact from Bill or his friends would be a violation that could send Bill back to jail. This boundary made everything feel safer, even though part of me felt sad that talking to my own brother now required lawyers and court orders. The legal separation from Bill was necessary, but it still hurt knowing our relationship had come to this. One quiet evening about a month after the attack, we were all cooking dinner together when Danny picked up a knife to chop vegetables. He paused and said he should probably wear a helmet for protection while handling sharp objects in our dangerous kitchen. Levi actually laughed at the joke, and I found myself laughing too for the first time in weeks. We spent the rest of dinner prep making silly jokes about needing safety gear for basic household tasks. Danny pretended to put on protective goggles before opening the oven, and Levi acted like he needed steel-toed boots to walk across the kitchen floor. The prosecutor called again to prepare me for the reality that Bill would probably get probation and mandatory programs rather than real prison time. She explained that first-time offenders with assault charges usually got anger management classes and community service. The bias education program would teach him about hate crime laws, but she warned me not to expect it to change his actual beliefs. I accepted that whether Bill changed was beyond my control, but at least our home was safer now with the protective order in place. The boundaries were clear and enforceable, which gave us more peace than hoping Bill would suddenly become a different person. Looking ahead at our calendar, we had therapy appointments scheduled every week for the next 2 months. Danny had his PTSD treatment sessions, while Levi and I continued working with Joyce on communication skills. Levi's restitution plan was working as he carefully tracked every dollar earned toward paying back the guitar. The legal process was moving forward properly, with the prosecutor handling the criminal case and insurance dealing with the civil claim. I watched Levi doing his homework one evening and pulled him into a longer hug than usual when he got up for a snack. He didn't pull away like most 13-year-olds would, but actually hugged me back. Our family had been through something terrible, but we were stronger and safer than before. The attack had exposed the hate living in our garage, but also showed us how brave Levi could be when it mattered. We still had months of legal proceedings ahead, and years of therapy to process everything. Bill would eventually get out and might try to rebuild his music career with those same awful songs. But right now we were together and healing, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Appreciate you sticking around and wondering through all this with me. It's been a ride sharing the journey together. Until we cross paths again. Like the video, it helps more than you think.